First and foremost, thank you so much OniPixel for reacting to my video on stream. Anyways, you guys probably know about the entire rare season, hype season that has been happening lately in Roblox trading, where demand items such as, I don't know, the super happy face, the Silver King of the Night, all of those items, they have been dropping very hard recently, in favor of rare items, in favor of semi-rare items, and unfortunately also in favor of fake hyped items. The point, ladies and gentlemen, is that all of these items, they are rebounding very slowly. So in this video we are going to be covering a few of these items and my personal predictions for how much they are going to be based on their previous peak. This video exclusively covers the mint items that have been doing bad, the mint items that have dropped, so we're not going to be covering the mint items that were just not affected by this entire rare season. And you know, these values that I'm talking about in this video, they are long-term prediction values. I'm talking about the values in the near future, and then we can come back and see if I was right or wrong, and also leave your own personal predictions down here because I would absolutely love to know. Now we're gonna start very low and we're gonna make our way up in price, starting by items that are worth less than 100,000 Robux. Now, there are a lot of demand items that, you know, are worth less than 100,000 Robux, so I could not individually talk about them in this video. For items that are currently worth between 11,000 value and 3,000 value, not recent average price, add like, I don't know, 2 to 4,000 value to their peak. So let's say an item like this, the Space Hair, which had a peak of 9,000 value earlier this year. This item could be worth like 10,000, 11,000, something around that, just as a little bit of an example. Now from 24,000 down to 12,000, you have to add like 4 to, I don't know, 6,000 value to their peak. And now for specifically those two categories, I feel like I have to make something very clear. Do not use their all-time peak if their all-time peak was from 2022, because in this range there are a few items like the perfectly legitimate business hat, Tentacles Jr., Mrs. Tentacles, all of these items that, you know, had a very high peak back in 2022, but they're probably never going to go back to their peak because they were either newly released items, or they were victims of trend shifts, or they were simply victims of, you know, hackers and password guessers. So only use like values of 2024 or sometimes 2023 as a reference, but never use 2022 or 2021 values for most of these items. Anyways, from 48,000 to 26,000, you add like 10 to 12,000 to their peak. From 75,000 up to 50,000, you add like 20 to 25,000 to their peak. And from 100,000 down to 75,000, you add like 25 to 35,000 value to their peak. These are all purely speculative and what I've personally seen by analyzing these items charts. Now let's go over to the 100,000 to 200,000 range. First of all, we have the Gold Emperor of the Night, and this one is a little bit of an oddball because this has always been seen as an obscure item in my personal opinion. I've never seen it as a good investment. This item peaked at 110,000, but I genuinely do not think that it can go much further than that. So I feel like 120,000 would be a nice future figure for this item. Then we have the Blue Queen of the Night, which, you know, peaked at 150,000 Robux, but every single one of these Queens of the Night, they have been, you know, surging in popularity. So just because it peaked at 150,000, I feel like 200,000 for a long-term prediction is, you know, reasonable for an item like that. Then we have the Scissors, and you know, the Scissors are really odd because they had a peak of 200,000, but nowadays they are like, I believe, 130,000. So I firmly believe that this item has some crazy potential at 130,000, and I believe that for a long-term prediction for this item, we could see it being like 250,000 Robux. Then we have the Kawaii Cat, which is, you know, part of the plushie series, and you know, the plushies, I've noticed that they have been falling a little bit off in popularity. It peaked at 145,000, and I feel like 180 could be like a good longer term prediction for an item like this. When I talk about long term, I'm talking about, you know, up until the next rare or, you know, semi season. So, you know, their peaks before this entire deflation hits once again. Then we have the Blue Clockwork headphones, and bro, I'm gonna be honest with you, I know that I'm wearing, you know, a blue shirt right here, but the shade of blue from these headphones, bro, they are absolutely hideous. They are absolutely disgusting. So I'm gonna be completely honest with you, even though this peaked at 145,000, I feel like 160,000 is already pushing a little bit too much for an item like the blue clockwork headphones. Then we have another queen of the night, which is the purple queen of the night, and as I told you guys, you know, these have been surging in popularity, so even though this peaked at 160,000, I could firmly long-term see this item being like 220,000 Robux or something like that. Then we have, ladies and gentlemen, the Silver Emperor of the Night, which peaked at 190,000, and I believe it is 140,000. In my personal opinion, this is the best investment for this value range. I feel like the Silver Emperor of the Night, considering it is silver, and you know, a lot of people like silver and all of that stuff, I could, and you can call me delusional, I genuinely don't care, but I could genuinely see the Silver Emperor of the Night long term being 300,000 value. Then we have the Black Iron Horns, which, you know, also peaked at 220,000, and I could very well see them at around like 260, 270. Then we have the Dominus Formidolosus. I don't know how you say the name of that item. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but it is completely fine. So I'm not gonna lie, bro, we've got to be honest. If you call this a Dominus, you are absolutely delusional. This is not a Dominus here, this is not a Dominus now, this will never be considered a Dominus in my books. Even though this item peaked at 170,000, I believe, I could not see this item at above 200,000. Also, in case you guys are a little bit confused as to why I did not include faces in this section, I'm gonna be talking about faces exclusively in a little bit. Now we have the slightly more expensive items, like, you know, 300,000 and beyond. Anyways, first of all, we have our beloved Valkyrie helm, ladies and gentlemen, which peaked at around 340,000. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I could very easily see this item being like 400,000, 410, even 420 in the future. More Robux is gonna keep on getting pumped inside of the economy, so you know, prices are realistically just keep on going up for a while. Then we have the Valkyrie's younger brother, which is the Ice Valkyrie, which peaked at around 470,000. I'm not gonna lie, just because of the emo demand and the amount of copies that this item has, I could very likely see this item being like 600,000 Robux or even more. Then we have the Silver King of the Night, which peaked at like 530,000, and I believe that we could see this item in the near future being like over 640, 630,000 Robux, and you know, be stable at around that range. And once again, I feel like I have to make that very clear, these are not like short-term predictions. Like, these items are not gonna be that value tomorrow. I'm talking about like in the next 6 months, in the next year. Then we have the Classic Fedora, which peaked at around 560,000, and you know, since the Classic Fedora is always just slightly above the Silver King of the Night, I feel like we could see the Classic Fedora at like 670, 690, even 700,000 perhaps. And then we have Twin Kadachi, and I'm not gonna lie, this one is kind of hard to tell because this is one of the newer demand items, so it is very hard to speculate how much this is gonna be long term. But since this one peaked at around like 630,000, if trends keep on going the way they are, maybe, just maybe, we could see this item being like 700,000 in the future, 750,000 in the future. Now we're gonna go over to the faces, and why do I want to talk about faces in a specific category? I don't really know, I just felt like doing it when I was recording the script to the video. Anyways, now we have the Playful Vampire, which peaked at around 120,000. This item does not have the super happy face demand. You know, super happy face has unbelievable demand. So I'm gonna be honest with you, I feel like 140,000 would be a decent range for us to see the Playful Vampire on. Then we have the Blizzard Beast Mode, which peaked at around 140,000, and you know, I feel like it could be 100 to 190. And then the regular Beast Mode face, which peaked at around 150,000. so you know, it is always going to be naturally just a little bit above the Blizzard Beast mode, so I feel like this could be 210,000 Robux, something around those lines. Then we have the Troublemaker, which is also hard to tell because it really over-raised recently, so I do not really know what the future awaits for this item, but considering this peaked at like 150,000, maybe 160, maybe 170,000 long term, I do not really know. Then we have the Prankster face, which peaked at around 280,000, and it is something very similar to the Troublemaker. It over-raised relatively recently, and it's hard to tell because if you take a look at the peak from like 2021, I believe, this item had a peak of like 310,000, so I really do not know what happened to this item between all of these years. So yeah, for Prankster, I'm not gonna lie, kind of hard to tell, but I would say like 310,000, 320,000, I don't know, something around those lines. Then we have the big leagues, ladies and gentlemen, the super happy face. I'm kidding, that is not the big leagues, I just wanted to make some people mad. The super happy face, which peaked at around 320,000 and walks a very similar path to like the Valkyrie Hell, maybe a little bit below, so I would say that 390,000, 400,000 is a, you know, reasonable value for us to see this item on in the very future. Then we have Yum, which peaked at around 960,000, but I genuinely feel like in the future this item could be worth like, I don't know, 1,300,000, 1,200,000, something around that, I personally believe, you know. But either way, now we have the Tattletale face, which peaked at around 1 million, and considering this item's peak and, you know, total amount of copies, this item could probably soon see a value of like 1.45 million Robux. I know it is very hard to see all of these items as high as I'm talking about. This is what the future awaits for us, you know. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the last section of this entire video, we have the special item section, which goes over particle items and also sound items. Now, this section heavily depends on whether trends will continue the way they are or not, but all of these predictions were made based on if these items are actually going to keep on being trending. So first of all, for the Winter Fairy, since it peaked at around 120,000 Robux, I feel like we could see this at 150,000, 160,000, and then the St. Patrick Fairy, which was peaked at 200,000 value, maybe we could see it at 250, 260. I don't really know, it's just kind of hard to estimate the values of these items just because of their special nature. We do not know if these particle items are gonna keep on being trending. Then we have the Bloxy Cola hat, which, you know, like which peaked at around 720,000, and I feel like we could see this item being 900,000, 920,000. And then we have the Chicken Suit, which is also another sound item, which goes, you know, which peaked at 760,000, and since it is always a little bit above the Bloxy Cola hat, I feel like this could be maybe 1 million. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have all of the horns, starting with the Poisoned Horns, which peaked at 1.45 million. And assuming trends keep on going the way they are, I feel like we could see this item at around 1.7 and 1.8 million Robux. Now for the Frozen Horns, considering they peaked at around 1.95 million, I feel like it would not be unreasonable for us to see an item like that at like 2.35, 2.4 million. And now the Fiery Horns, which are the very same deal as, you know, the Chicken and Bloxy relationship. Fiery is always a little bit better than Frozen, even though it peaked at the same value as Frozen, but I feel like we could see the Fiery Horns at 2.5, 2.6 million in the near future. And I would absolutely love to know what you guys think about all of these predictions down here in the comments. Thank you guys so much for every single member of the YouTube channel. You guys have been helping me a lot lately. The support has been immensely appreciated. You guys are absolutely amazing. I love all of you. Please like and subscribe, you know, do all of that very juicy stuff and all of that, you know what I mean. Thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.